Hi, I'm Tim Medin. We're going to be talking today a little bit about using the access we have to have a high value test, right? To demonstrate the risk inside a particular organization. My name is Tim Medin. I am the CEO and founder of Red Siege. We do offensive things. We do pen testing, red teaming, frankly, all kinds of pen testing. I'm a senior instructor with the SANS Institute, and I am the author of the SANS, the pen test course at SANS 560. SEC 560, you may have heard of that, formerly known as Network Penetration Testing and Ethical Hacking. We are actually going to rename it, rebrand it. I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Shh, don't tell SANS, it's okay. I'm also IANS faculty, and I've been doing this kind of stuff for a long time. So we'll try to bring in some real world examples. In fact, we will discuss some real world examples here in our pen test. Remember here, the bad guys, they have goals, right? The bad guys are trying to get into your network and take an action that's advantageous for them, right? It used to be that they would get into your network, they would steal credit card information because that's relatively easy to turn into money for the bad guys. There are some things, though, that are a little bit harder to monetize, right? It's harder for a bad guy to take health information and monetize that. Now, of course, if you've been, frankly, paying attention at all, we've seen ransomware. This is a big game changer, right? And it's been around for quite some time now, a number of years. It's been getting bigger and bigger, having greater and greater impact in our industry and frankly our lives. But now, any organization is now a valuable target because they can take the entire system offline. Those health records that a bad guy couldn't easily monetize, now that bad guy can take the access away from, in this case, maybe a hospital, make them pay, right? So the game very much has changed. It's always important that we have to understand, what do the bad folks want? What are they trying to do? What goals are they trying to accomplish? Right? Could it be ransomware? Do they want to steal your intellectual property, right? Do you have some kind of IP that, I'm just going to say, that proverbial China wants to steal, right? We have to understand to some degree, what are the real threat actors? What are they doing in the world, right? What are they trying to get from you? What actions are they going to take on your network? What are they trying to grab, right? If you've got credit card information, that's pretty straightforward, right? As we discussed, much easier to monetize than other sort of information. Maybe they want data about your users, right? It's important to understand, what is the risk to you and your organization, right? So we need to frame our pen test, our red team, whatever it might be, in the context of the organization, not just the data, right? Not just getting access to computers. It's much bigger than that. We have to understand the entire organization. We need to understand, what are those bad folks trying to do. One of the things that we call a win in a test is getting domain admin. That's cool. That's a great, that's interesting goal. But it's still one step, at least, away from the important data. It is a tool. It is not a destination. Yes, it is great. Yes, we still call it a win. It feels good to get that level of access when I, as a pen tester, get in. But sometimes we don't need that access. In fact, getting that access could be detrimental, could work against our test and actually make it less valuable. So we always need to think about that when we're performing our test. We need to understand, what is the end goal, right? What is the goal of our test? Well, the goal of our test is to model the real world attacker. When the attacker gets in, what are they going to do, right? What are they going to be going after? It's not simply getting in. Once the bad guys get in, they need to access data, right? Expand their access, lateral movement, privilege escalation, whatever it might be, to steal sensitive information, deploy malware. Maybe they're a hacktivist. They want to take your systems offline, right? Getting in is not simply enough. Now, I've taken this quote here from my 560 class. Any of you students who have taken that may recognize this piece. What is pen testing? Well, pen testing, what we want to do is we want to identify the vulnerabilities, right? Identify issues inside the target. Well, that's great, but that's just the beginning. And we want to exploit those flaws, right? Demonstrate the risk. If we find a vulnerability, what does it mean? Now, a quick aside here, just because you can't take advantage of a vulnerability doesn't mean it's actually not vulnerable, right? It could be that the payload we're using is caught by a defensive product, or it's somehow is a bad payload, or the configuration is just a little off, or if we encoded it a little bit differently, it might work. So we also need to understand some of that. Now, the reverse, right? If I am able to take advantage of a vulnerability in a system, and I can get, our famous remote code execution, or RCE, we have demonstrated the system is indeed vulnerable. It's not really debatable. Even though sometimes you'll have targets, they'll push back and be like, yeah, we need to downgrade that issue. I'm like, but it worked. I'm like, no, it didn't. I have screenshots and the whole rest of the test, keys on that, whatever, right? So find the vulnerabilities, exploit those. Now, the difference between us and the real bad guys is what happens next, right? We have a scope and a rules of engagement. Us good folks. The bad guys, not so much, right? I'm not going to just take piles and piles of data and take it back to my systems because I'm responsible for that. I don't want to be responsible for that. I'm not going to deploy real world malware. So we are to some degree handcuffed, right? Us as the ethical offensive people, we need to follow the rules. And, people complain about the scope. It's a fact of life. The bad guys, they don't have a scope. True. But I can't risk taking an entire organization offline as part of a test. I know this is a very long sort of discussion. We can wrap this up as we have to follow the rules. We have to follow the agreed upon rules related to the scope and some of the other rules of engagement. Ultimately, we're going to get here to the important piece, the final piece here. Our goal here is to understand, help quantify, help figure out what is the real risk to the organization. Right? The risk here in identifying that, presenting that, helping the organization make better business decisions, whether they should accept the risk, mitigate, patch, remove the system, whatever it might be, our goal is to help them make better decisions. Now you'll notice here in this definition, it doesn't say we need to get to domain admin. We need to demonstrate the risk, understand the risk, right? So it is important, but it's not the be-all, end-all, right? The domain admin access is very important. Now, what if we can't get domain admin, right? What if we can't get that? Well, do we even need it? Is a separate sort of discussion. Remember, focus on the data. Let's say we've got a test and we phish. Right? Let's pretend a real world actor has phished an engineer inside your organization. Let's say it's a manufacturing facility, phished the engineer. That engineer has access to probably a lot of drawings, intellectual property. The bad guy might not need to pivot to steal that intellectual property or encrypt it all, right? So, and more importantly here, if we were to land as the pen tester, as the offensive person, and frankly, in a way, misguidedly try to chase domain admin, we might be doing a disservice. Right? Because if I, as the attacker, can land in that system and immediately access the sensitive data, why do we need to escalate? Why does that matter? right? Why do we care if we can to get this other access if we don't need it? In fact, it might hide how critical that initial access and maybe over permissions of file shares, it might hide the criticality of something like that, right? Let's say we've got Steve or Sally in marketing. They too have access to those sensitive drawings, right? They have access to those sensitive drawings. That can be a problem because now marketing, why does marketing need access to these sensitive drawings? Any breach of those accounts would be of a significant impact. And again, if we landed on those computers, moved to domain admin, it might hide the fact that, hey, you've got very important data left all over the place, right? The analogy here to some degree would be thieves going in to rob a bank. All they care about is the money. They don't care how they get the money, right? If the vault is wide open, run into the vault, put the money in your pants and shirt or whatever, and then run. They don't need to figure out the combination and get the key to the vault or however the heck those things work, right? That's not the important piece. So we got to think of it that way. So we need to use our access, right? Use the access we have and use that to access that data. So we're going to target maybe specific users, but always keep our mind on the prize of that data or process that's important to the organization. Now, fun things we always see, right? Passwords are terrible. Passwords from a pen tester, red teamer's perspective, still the gift that keeps on giving, right? We've got so many organizations where users inside the organization use their passwords internally. They use that same password at some other site. That other site, let's say, is compromised. The bad folks dump those passwords. We crack those, then use those to log in to the initial organization because the user reused passwords. Remember, password reuse is terrible. You've probably all heard this before. Just want to go over it real quick. Lots of different resources here for this. Dehashed is relatively cheap. That can be a great resource. Plenty of other resources out there to find these breached credentials. We might be able to use those in our test. Related to that, we can try those passwords that have been breached. We can try common bad passwords, right? The gift that keeps on giving season and year. The reason is we sort of have this idea in security, in IT, or in, I don't know, I guess the world, that passwords should be rotated every 90 days. Because somebody came up with that idea in the 80s and we're stuck with it, right? And users have figured out, like, you know what? I can just look out the window here and I can figure out my password. And I don't have to call those annoying IT help desk people to figure out my password. Those types of passwords, or season and year. So right now we've got winter 2021. Or if you're really secure, add an exclamation point to the end, right? Realistically, a little tip for the defenders: ban the word winter, fall, autumn, spring, and summer in your passwords. Some of the stuff kind of disappears. Great tools for things like this: Invoke Domain Password Spray by Bo Bullock from Black Hills. This will actually extract the fine-grained password policy from your organization. We can give it our list. The goal here is to prevent any sort of lockout, right? Defensive detection here. Look on some of the logon failures. The hard part here is, realistically, your organization is defended if you get a login failure. The piece that's interesting is a lot of login failures followed by a success. That's the interesting thing right here. Interesting conversation here I had with my friend Derek Banks. A little bit of an old screenshot. Still love this. We were working together on a test, and the defender was really good, like really, really good. And literally, like the next week, it's like, hey, I found a password of season and year, single factor on the VPN, and got in. Kerber roasted, off to the races. So does this stuff work? Yeah. It still works, right? This still absolutely works. Sorry, I had the screen there a little bit backwards. Forgot about that. Still absolutely works. Yes, this screenshot's a little bit old. The key here is, remember, I don't need all the passwords. I just need one, right? I just need one. Let's talk through a couple of various case studies here. These are from real world tests. No, I'm not going to tell you the real organization. We'll kind of keep it, we've only got so much time here. We'll kind of keep it high level, just talk you through common ways that we've seen tests go where we had a high impact and didn't need a domain admin level access. So here was an example here at an organization. This was a financial institution. So spray, right? The password spray, we tried some common bad passwords, found a user with a bad password, used that to log in to the VPN. No, did not have 2FA. These days, you should definitely have 2FA, especially with the big move to work from home. At that point, once we were in, we jumped to SharePoint. Now, SharePoint is just a web version of a file share that's frankly a little bit harder to audit, right? We've got SharePoint everywhere. No escalation necessary, right? We had access as that user with the bad password, logged in with the VPN, immediately found PII on the SharePoint server. That was it. No escalation needed. The interesting thing here, if we go back to business risk, this is simple. This is dead simple, right? It's a password to all the sensitive data is gone. Right? If we had tried to, and I'm not saying don't try it, but I'm saying if we had tried to get domain admin, which I remember correctly on this one we did, it could have sort of hidden that the risk is really, really big here, right? Random user, access to all this data, the permissions were incorrect on SharePoint, and it was just gone, right? It demonstrates the tremendous impact from a breach should just this lowly user be impacted. Kerber roasting, one of my favorites. So if we can get access, we just need access as a single user, frankly, any user, not a privileged user. What we can do here is we can request tickets. So we can request tickets here, pull those back to our system, and we can do offline cracking. The interesting thing here is because they're service accounts, the passwords are probably not ever going to change, right? Or if they do, it's probably very rare. They may have been, the account's passwords may not have been changed in a very long time. So we might not be compliant with modern password policies. And the reason why this works is the tickets are encrypted using the password hash of the target service. Lots of great tools out there. There's PowerShell scripts, built into all sorts of C2 frameworks. Here, I've got an example from Empire where we're grabbing the invoke Kerberoast. Grab that, pull the tickets back, throw it into Hashcat, let it run. And again, because these service accounts don't typically follow that same sort of normal 90-day rotation, by the way, whole separate discussion, which is the 90-day rotation is bad for users because users pick worse passwords. Anyway, but this gives us a long time to crack these passwords. Case study 2. So we had a laptop. So we were on the internal network to begin this test. We were on the network to begin this test, guessed a password, did the Kerberoast style attack, right? We've got access to the computer, access as that user. We grab a number of tickets. One of the things that we commonly see in organizations is SQL servers are tied to Kerberoast. Now, the issue isn't Kerberoast per se. It's the passwords people select, the admins in this case, selected for this service account. Crack this password, we've got access to the database. You'll notice here, short steps. Access to the laptop, laptop to SQL. 2 simple steps. And we didn't have to get domain admin here, right? We're demonstrating that the risk, it's there. In fact, it's a significant risk because the number of steps here, right, pretty small. Don't need to get access as a user and then move and lateral move and then escalate and then get access to the database. It's essentially user straight to the database, right? Remember, what do the bad guys want? What is the important thing for them? They want the information that can make them money. What does that mean? Right? Do you have credit cards? Take that, easily monetize that. Is it ransomware? Right? Where they want the access. That's a much bigger thing these days, right? We get a lot of client calls discussing ransomware and such. If it's just some of the data, look around your network. What we have seen almost, and this isn't even really hyperbole, I think my guys would back me up on this, but 100% of organizations, there's at least one file server, file share, SharePoint, CMS, whatever you want to call it, that has some of the sensitive data floating around, right? Excessively shared. Well, we got Steve or Sally in marketing that don't need access to that floating around. We were in one organization, very good defensively, very, very good, spot on. Had a very tough time doing lateral movement, getting access to other accounts, and it turned out that users were creating their own file shares on their own computers and using that to share information. So all we had to do was look around and then just start grabbing some of this. Was it all of the sensitive data? No. But it was bank accounts and routing numbers for some very wealthy individuals. I don't need many of those to retire very comfortably. Frankly, probably like one of those to retire very comfortably. Also, think about it from the organization's perspective. How many of those have to be lost before breach notification? And what you don't want at a institution that is caters to the very wealthy is to be in the news because you lost data. Those wealthy people will split very quickly. They have the resources to do so. They've got the money that they very much want to protect, have a significant impact, right? From the good guy's perspective, in that situation, all they wanted to do, all these users wanted to do was to quickly share the data. And frankly, what they did was ingenious in a way, right? There might be other restrictions on the network that prevented a more secure sharing. And they're like, you know what? We'll just share it this other way because it's easier and faster. Of course, we saw that that can create issues. I'm not saying that they should have done it. I'm just saying users will do what they need to do to get their job done. And security sometimes seems as an inefficiency, or we'll do it like this one time. It's quick, it's easy, right? And that's not necessarily always the case, right? Where this can be a significant impact, right? Especially when we get the overlap here on the good guy wants and the bad guy wants, and the good guys are exposing too much data. What are some ways to find some of this? I love me some PowerView. PowerView, fantastic tool. We can use the find interesting domain share file. What this does is it will enumerate the systems inside the network, look for open file shares, and then look at the names of those files for things containing words like passwords or admin or login, right? Interesting files. Now, this is all customizable, but this helps us more quickly identify some of that. So in that organization I was talking about where they've got these big bank accounts, right? How do we find this? Literally, quite literally, with this tool, we found these shares all over the place. If you're a defender, run this in your organization. See what's out there. Lock the ones down that don't need to be there, and the ones that do, audit those permissions very carefully to make sure that Steve and Sally in marketing don't have access to credit card information. They just don't need that, right? Another great situation, this was Mike Saunders on my team. He was doing a test. These These folks are pretty amazing. Um, we go back to them and they get better and better, and they're probably, if not the most difficult one we have, um, close to it, meaning they got some fantastic security practices. What happened here is same thing I talked about before. This is actually a different organization where there was we had a tough time doing lateral movement, privilege escalation. It just wasn't working for us. So we ended up finding very similarly sensitive data floating around in file shares. No, this is not real client data. I'm not that dumb. We took some random screenshot off the internet, but it had like checking account information and checks that were floating around. Again, overly exposed, accessible by a large number of users. In this case, I think it was these were Linux systems. We can use PowerView is fine. Works on Windows systems. On Linux, we're gonna have to get a little bit more creative. Use a little command line kung fu with like the find command. So here's an example where we're looking for writable configuration files. Maybe we can change configurations so they run less securely, or give us passwords, whatever it might be. We can find ways to escalate on some of these systems. All right, another case study here, case study 4. We were in an organization looking around using a little bit of Linux command line kung fu. We found backups. So backups for users all over the network. In fact, there's servers and stuff from all over the network. Inside those backups that were overexposed, you see this here, the read and execute is in the last position, which means any user can read this directory and go into the directory. That's what the X means for this directory. We found all sorts of sensitive data in there from insecured backups. Now, they weren't writable, so I couldn't destroy them if I was a ransomware actor, but we took that back, looked inside those, we found sensitive data, that passwords that gave us access to the database server with, tons and tons and tons of rows of data that was in there, sensitive data on top of this, right? Look around the network, find this file share with backups exposed, grab the passwords, once again, without domain admin. Remember here, and I keep hitting this over and over again, the important thing here is determining and communicating the business risk. Great quote here from Tim Malcolm Vetter. I can't believe pen testers and red teamers are still focusing on domain admin. DA is in most cases a waste of access. It's inefficient. If you're modeling a sophisticated attacker, whatever that means, abuse the path of least privilege. Usually the path of least noise. Completely agree with this. Now, I'm not saying don't go for DA, but maybe after you try it through some of these, stealthier, quieter, simpler methods, come back and then get DA. Another great quote here from Jeff McJunkin. Periodic reminder, gaining DA, domain admin, is the equivalent of taking a screenshot of script alert XSX. It implies impact, but it doesn't do anything to actually demonstrate the impact, right? Imagine if we take this, our pen test report to some sort of C-level, and like they got domain admin. Cool, what does that mean? How's our data, right? We need to focus on the data or the process. That is the important thing here, right? Feel free to contact me, tim@redsiege.com, contact@redsiege.com. You can find us all over the internets, on the Tweeters, Facebook, LinkedIn. And with that, we're going to wrap up the presentation. If you want a copy of these slides, go to redsiege.com/access. But thank you all for attending, and hopefully enjoy some time off over these next few days. Thanks again.